All right, let's get real for a second. Imagine you just fought a literal superpower for your freedom. You've won the war, you're a hero. But when you go to buy a loaf of bread, your paycheck is basically wallpaper. That was the grim reality for the United States in the 1780s. The American dream was basically a financial nightmare. The printing press disaster. To fund the revolution, the Continental Congress did the one thing you should never do. They just kept hitting print. Between 1775 and 1779, they flooded the streets with nearly 200 million Continental dollars. But there was a catch. There was no gold or silver backing that paper. It was just a pinky promise from a brand new government that didn't even have the power to collect taxes yet. And the result? One of the most brutal hyperinflations in history. Check out these numbers. In 1775, one paper dollar was worth one silver dollar. Simple, right? But by 1780, it took 40 paper dollars to buy what one silver coin could. A year later, it hit 100 to 1, and then it just kept sliding. It got so bad that people started using the phrase "not worth a continental" as an insult for anything totally useless. George Washington himself was fuming. He famously said it took a wagon load of money just to buy a wagon load of food. The people who got hit the hardest, the soldiers. These guys bled for independence, only to be paid in trash paper. Desperate veterans were forced to sell their IOUs to speculators for pennies on the dollar just to put food on the table. By 1783, the frustration boiled over. Unpaid troops actually marched on Congress, forcing our founding fathers to flee Philadelphia. It was a total mess. The debt mountain. On top of the worthless cash, the country was buried under a mountain of debt. We're talking $54 million in federal debt, plus another $25 million borrowed by the states. In today's terms, that's a staggering burden for a brand new nation. By 1789, the U.S. was basically a startup on the verge of bankruptcy, held together by a weak government that couldn't pay its bills. So how did we go from a total financial wreck to a global economic powerhouse? Well, it was going to take a genius and a massive political fight to pull America back from the edge. And that's where a guy named Alexander Hamilton enters the frame. Stick around, because things are about to get intense. So here's the problem. The Continental Congress needed to fund a revolution against the world's most powerful empire, but they had a tiny issue. They couldn't actually collect taxes. Their solution? They fired up the printing presses and just never turned them off. Between 1775 and 1779, they flooded the colonies with nearly $200 million in continental currency. Now, in the 18th century, that was an absolutely insane amount of paper. But here's the kicker. This money wasn't backed by gold, silver, or anything tangible. It was essentially a giant national IOU based on a prayer that we'd actually win the war. And as every Econ 101 student knows, when you print money out of thin air, its value vanishes into thin air. In 1775, one continental was worth one silver dollar. Easy. By 1777, the slide began. By 1780, the economy was in a free fall. It took 40 continentals to buy what one silver dollar could buy just a few years earlier. We're talking about a 4,000% drop in purchasing power. By 1781, the exchange rate hit a staggering 100 to 1, and then it just broke. The currency became so worthless that people started using it to wallpaper their homes or light their pipes. This is where that famous American phrase comes from, "not worth a continental." It literally meant your money was trash. Even George Washington was losing his mind over it. He wrote that a wagon load of money could barely buy a wagon load of provisions. You could literally walk into a shop with a bag full of cash and walk out with nothing but a loaf of bread. The moral of the story? The Continental Congress tried to print their way to freedom, but they almost printed the country into a grave. They learned the hard way that you can't build a superpower on funny money. This hyperinflation didn't just destroy bank accounts, it destroyed trust in the government itself. Now, here's the thing you have to understand.
Back then, we weren't really the United States. We were more like 13 different countries sharing a backyard. While the Continental Congress was drowning in $54 million of federal debt, the states were out there doing their own thing. They had borrowed another $25 million collectively to fight the British, but everyone was handling it differently. It was the financial Wild West. There was zero coordination. You had states like Massachusetts trying to pay off their debts with high taxes, which, spoiler alert, led to literal armed rebellions like Shays' Rebellion. Then you had other states just ghosting their creditors or printing even more of their own local paper money, making the inflation nightmare even worse. If you're a soldier or a merchant, you didn't just have to worry about the value of the Continental, you had to figure out if a Virginia pound was worth more than a New York shilling. It was total chaos. And the federal government, they were basically toothless. Under the first version of our government, the Articles of Confederation, Congress could ask the states for money to pay the national debt, but the states could just say no, and most of them did. By 1789, the total bill hit roughly $80 million. For a brand new country with no credit score and no way to collect taxes, this wasn't just a budget problem, it was a ticking bomb. The worst part? Because nobody believed the government would ever pay them back, the original holders of this debt, the veterans and farmers, started panicking. They sold their debt certificates to wealthy speculators for 10 or 20 cents on the dollar just to get some quick cash for dinner. The rich were getting richer off the desperation of the poor, and the national credit was in the gutter. America was basically a startup on the verge of a going-out-of-business sale.
Now, if you think the situation at home was bad, the situation abroad was an absolute embarrassment. To win the war, we didn't just need guts, we needed cash, lots of it. And we got it from France and the Dutch. But by the mid-1780s, the world was starting to realize that the United States was the friend who borrows $20 and then never answers your texts. The France problem. France had literally bankrupted themselves helping us beat the British. We owed them millions, but because our government was so weak under the Articles of Confederation, we weren't even paying the interest on those loans, let alone the principal. Imagine being Thomas Jefferson or John Adams sitting in the fancy courts of Paris or Amsterdam trying to look like the representative of a serious new nation while everyone in the room knows your country's checks are bouncing. No credit, no power. The Dutch, who were the world's bankers back then, were completely losing faith. And in the 18th century, credit was everything. If Europe decided America was a deadbeat nation, we were finished. No credit meant no more loans. No loans meant no navy to protect our ships. And no navy meant we were just sitting ducks for the next just broke. We were vulnerable. The real danger. Our international credit rating was basically zero. Foreign powers were starting to wonder if the United States was just a fluke, a temporary rebellion that was about to collapse under its own weight. We were a startup that had lost the trust of its biggest VCs. If we didn't find a way to pay back France and Holland, the independence we just fought for wasn't going to last another decade. So, to recap, we have worthless paper money at home, 13 states arguing over debt, and the rest of the world thinks we're a joke. The stage was set for a total collapse, or a miracle. And that's when the new Constitution was signed and a 34-year-old immigrant named Alexander Hamilton was handed the keys to the empty treasury.